My name's Rupert. I'm one of the co-founders of Information EXP, and I'm joined here today with Ben, the other co-founder of Information EXP. And today we've got a webinar about policies and procedure management within SharePoint. So without further ado, Ben, who's this webinar for?
Yeah, it's good question, Rupert. So this is really for anyone that is responsible in their organization for managing policies and procedures. That typically might be people in a quality management role, operations managers or HR managers, or also anyone that's responsible for maintaining and keeping any ISO accreditations up to date, particularly 9001, specifically focusing on document management processes.
And I'm guessing it's also maybe the people who support those people in IT roles as well who find it useful. And the second thing is, most people are here, we hope. What are they going to walk away with?
Yeah, it's got three takeaways. So the first thing is that we're going to go and summarize the policy life cycle. So how do we take documents all the way through from the draft stage through to being renewed and updated? The next thing that we'll cover is the 4 ways that we've identified where people will actually find information. How do we make the policies available and distribute them in a way that makes it easy to access? And then the third thing is, how do we go through and keep our policies current? So typically we find that this process is often managed in a set of Excel spreadsheets. So you might have a spreadsheet that keeps all of the next review dates, who the owners are, what the reference numbers are. And what we're going to do is show you how can use SharePoint to move away from that manual Excel-based process.
Excellent, Ben. I think there's some really good points there, particularly around the feedback where everything's great when it's new, but then after a while, changes happen. People start working around a policy, and then there's the way and there's what's documented, and how do you bring those two back together? Yeah. So I think first things first, Ben, it's probably worth taking us through at a high level anyway, through the what we see, the policy lifecycle.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just move that on. Good. So we start with the draft stage of the document. So that will often be referring to a standardized document template that you may have set up, your policy starting point, and we'll go through, we'll make edits, we'll make updates to that document. And also, again, if you are ISO accredited, those documents will need to have a unique reference number assigned to them. So how do we get that information validated and assigned? Once we've drafted the document, we need to go and issue it on the next stage, which is the approval step. So this may be one or many stages. It could be a subject matter expert that's responsible, and you may have additional stages such as going to a quality manager, or perhaps even going to the chief executive if you have a regulation requirement to support that. Once the documents have been approved, they need to be published. They need to be allocated to the right place, and quite often they may even go through a conversion process from Word to a final published PDF version, because people feel more confident and comfortable that they can't be modified and it's easier to distribute. So once our documents have been published, we want our organization, our staff to actually read them, acknowledge them. So how do we distribute it to people, and how do we actually get them to attest that they've read and understood that document? But what happens if people aren't happy with that policy? What about if there's a regulatory change? What if people have observed that people aren't actually following that policy? How do we gather feedback and create a mechanism to allow people to feedback any concerns or changes or issues with that policy, so that then finally it can go through an updated review process? Now, if there isn't any feedback and that policy is good, it may just be that it needs to be reviewed every 2 years, for instance. So how do we make sure that we're notified at the right time with plenty of time, so that document doesn't expire and we're potentially non-compliant in terms of our ISO accreditation, for example? And then, of course, once it's been reviewed, we're back to the beginning, take it through the draft, update, revision, and take it all the way through the process again.
Excellent, Ben. So let's just dive in, and should we start the draft?
Yeah, sounds good. So what we're going to do, first of all, let's just take a quick look at Microsoft Word, I think. So that's where typically people would start creating some documents. So we're going to just go into Microsoft Word here and click New. And one of the things that we've talked about in other webinars that we've run is how we can actually store documents as templates in SharePoint, but have them published straight through into Microsoft Word. It's a concept called organizational assets. And it makes it much easier for people to start with the right template every time. Why don't we just load a policy template quickly, Rupert, and see how that goes and loads the right templates so we can go and save it. just
Yeah.
kick that off a second.
And I think it's probably just worth saying through the course of this demo, we'll be using a company called Contoso. It's a Microsoft demo company. So we're not giving away too many of our company secrets.
Absolutely. So as we can see, we've got this in this demo case, a little bit of a generic, simplistic template here where we can go through, fill out the information, document reference, et cetera, et cetera. We're not going to go through saving this into SharePoint for the moment. What we're going to do, we have a policy that we've set up earlier, and we're just going to jump straight over into SharePoint and go and upload that. So do you want to go and fire up the SharePoint portal there? Before we get to the process of uploading the documents, it's just worth taking a quick look at what we're seeing here. So this is effectively what we'd think of as an intranet homepage. It's your entry point into Microsoft 365, and it's where you communicate any core news, any links to tools that you use, such as booking leave, staff surveys, payslips, or any business tools that you have. And then we can see on the bottom right-hand corner there, we've got some KPIs that we've presented via a Power BI chart. So that's great. But what we're going to do now is go into our policy admin area where we'll go and upload our documents. So Rupert's going to click on the admin link, which we can see in our navigation there. And this takes us into a view where we've got all of our policies and they've been grouped by the relevant departments that are responsible for owning them. And we can see that there's metadata assigned. We've got things like department, what the policy type is, any keywords. And we can also see that these documents have all got a unique document reference number assigned to them. So in our case, that reference number is made up of the department, the type, and then an incremental number that needs to be assigned to it. So Rupert, let's just go and upload a new document and see how this works.
Okay, so I'm just dragging it off screen to on screen. So here's one I created earlier. Now, I know this document here is about flexible working or this policy, so it's going to sit under HR. So if I actually put it over the HR group here, that's going to help me because it's going to add it to the HR group automatically. So that's one less piece of data that I need to assign. And actually you see it's been uploaded here and right here, it's just appeared. But Ben, I've just noticed we haven't got a document number yet.
Yeah, absolutely. So as Rupert said, we've automatically assigned the HR metadata just by nature of uploading it onto the HR group, but we've got a bit more information. Because we haven't assigned a type yet, we don't have enough information to generate that unique reference number. So what we're going to do is just fill out some more metadata by going to the information pane there. So let's just go and click on that. And then we're going to go and click on the edit all button to fill in our document properties. So we can see that some information has been filled out already. Department's already set. We know that this is going to be a policy. So Rupert, if you just click into that and start typing, we can see that we have an autocomplete function. If you're not sure what the available options are, such as with keywords, we can click on the tags and see what the available keywords that have been set up. So we're going to select a couple of keywords, work-life balance. You can even go and add more keywords yourself at this point if the right keywords aren't available. So let's just go and apply that. The one final piece of information that we need to populate before we move on is who is the owner of this document. If we don't assign an owner, then in 2 years' time, no one will be notified that the document expires. So it's important to make sure that you do actually assign those owners so that we can then notify them at the next review cycle. So now that we've populated that, all of the rest of the information is going to get filled out as part of our approval processes. So we're just going to press save for the moment. So it takes a few seconds for the numbering process to kick off behind the scenes. So what we'll do is we'll summarize what we've covered so far. And then when we move on to the next stage, you'll see how that number is going to get automatically populated here. So do you want to just summarize what we've covered, Rupert?
Yeah, so this is the first step, the drafting phase. So we talked about templates there. What you saw was that you can publish templates directly into Word. Those templates are stored actually within SharePoint and can be managed yourselves as controlled documents. So policies, procedures, all these kind of living documents we call controlled documents. So, but that's, a great way to start, particularly when trying to drive consistency. The second piece we saw there was around the tags and the categorizations, and you can put controls around whether people should be able to allow additional tags, or maybe you want to control that to a level so you're using consistent terms throughout. The third piece, which we hope is whirring behind the scenes as we talk, is about the creation of a unique reference. So that reference based on your business rules. So some people it's fine just to have a number, but for other people, they actually want to put a bit more context in what that number means, maybe what kind of document it is, who it belongs to, and an incremental number. And then the final piece is, don't forget, because we're using SharePoint, we've got version control. So if you're going back to a policy and someone's made some changes to it, you can go open up Word, you can do a compare documents or compare versions. And so rather than having to maybe read a 10-page document, you can just go straight to the pieces which have changed, accelerating the process of review there. So that's for draft stage, Ben. What happens after the draft stage?
So we've created our document. Hopefully we'll see in a second that it's got a unique reference number assigned. So the next stage is that we need to go and approve it. So let's just go back into our document library a minute. Let's just maybe quickly refresh the page there, and we should see that that number's been assigned. So that's perfect. We can see it's got this number now. So it's gone and taken, again, the HR term, the fact that it's a policy, so it's been prefixed with P, and it's now got an incremental number that's been assigned to it. So it's number 18 within that grouping. So our numbering has worked, it's fantastic. So now what we're going to do is actually go and kick it off through the approval process. So Rupert's selecting the 3 dots next to the document here. And what we're going to do is hover over this automate option, which allows you to create your own business rules for how documents get published. Now, as we talked about before, quite often an approval process may actually take up multiple stages. So we're going to kick this off through the first stage, which may be to a subject matter expert. And then the second stage is going to go to the head of quality. So we're just going to give this a few seconds to load up. It's worth noting here that typically you will again have some rules that say, I can't approve this myself. So if I sign it to myself, I'll get notified that that's not available. Or again, you may have certain levels of approvers based on what the department is. So one person can approve HR documents, but someone else might need to approve finance documents. So we've just kicked that off. And what's going to happen behind the scenes, it will start the approval process. But while we're waiting for that, Rupert, let's just hover over the navigation again. And we want to take a look at the list of policy approvers where we can see how we're maintaining that list there. So we can see that we've set up for the given departments who the allowed approvers are. So it allows people to be able to submit it to the right person, provided that we have those sort of, checks and constraints, that they're not just submitting it to the intern, for instance. So you may have heard, yeah, go ahead, Rupert. Yeah.
So what we're saying is if I signed it to somebody who wasn't responsible for HR, that workflow is not going to fire, or if I'm going to get a message saying, actually, this is the wrong person, you need to find the right person. So we've got that balance there. That's fantastic.
Yeah, exactly. So let's just pop open our email because we've just heard something happen in the background. So let's just go, we've got that email tab open there, which is great. And we can now see that we've received a notification from Power Automate or from Microsoft Flow, which is the tool that supports all of these business processes. And we can see that we've got some contextual information. We've even got the option to respond to that approval process directly within the email. Having said that, we should probably have a look at the document first, shouldn't we, Rupert? So why don't we click on the link there? And we're going to go and open that. And we can see that we've been taken into a filtered view of our library that shows that document in context. And we can validate it's got the number. We can validate the metadata. In a realistic scenario, you'd probably go and open the document itself, or you would open the document itself and go and review it and make any comments if necessary. We don't need to do that for today. So we're just going to jump back to the email that we had there. And we can actually move this on through the process directly in that email. So let's just click on approve, send to quality team. Yeah, looks good. And of course, any comments that we submit as part of this will go back to the person that requested that approval. And we can see that that approval step is taking place in the body of the email. If you're heavy users of Microsoft Teams, you will also be notified for approvals in Teams as well, and you can interact with it there. So it depends which tool you prefer, but email is, obviously the most common. We can already see that a notification has come back. So as the person that submitted, I've been notified, yeah, your document's been approved. It's now going on to the next stage. So that's good to know.
Yeah. Now, I've just been around, Ben. One of the smart things here, and if you're not used to these approval emails, is that the email actually gets updated itself. So unlike traditional email, which is kind of once it's sent, it is what it is. The content of this email has been updated. So if I go click away from this email and come back to it, you can see that I've already put my comments in there, my date submitted. So I'm not thinking I have to go and do that. It's fantastic.
So yeah, absolutely. And I think while Rupert was just summarizing that point, we can see that actually the next stage has already been kicked off, and that email has just come through to the top there. So what we're saying now is we did the first approval. That's great. Once the first approval had been finished, the next stage is to go to the head of quality, who's going to be responsible for actually going through and actually publishing it. And we can see this time around, there's a slightly different set of options. So what we're highlighting is that you can design your own set of rules. It doesn't just have to be approve, reject. You can add in a third or fourth additional options that do slightly different things. So we've defined a concept called a temporary approval, which means that it will get published. But when it assigns the next review date, it's going to push it 30 days into the future instead of 2 years into the future. It doesn't have to be 30, it could be 90 days, it could be whatever is relevant in your organization, but it's useful to demonstrate. So we're going to do that 30-day temporary approval, and we can go and have a look and see what actually happens to that document behind the scenes. So we've done that. We'll get another notification shortly and it will get published. Let's just jump back to the policies management area. So now if we just expand or scroll over to the right-hand side of that policy, we can see, maybe refresh the page.
Yeah.
Quick refresh, do that again. Let's just select that. There we go. So what we can see now is that a next review date has been assigned. And unlike some of the other documents, it's been assigned as 30 days into the future based on that temporary business logic. And you can even see that we've got a bit of color coding here to flag up visually which documents are good, which documents are due, which is that amber, and perhaps any documents that are overdue, as we can see below. We've got some overdue documents which are flagged up as red. So let's just scroll back a second. So also, because it's gone through the approval process, we can capture that metadata. We can see when it was issued, when it was approved by, who the approver was. And actually behind the scenes, we're sending information into an audit log for our management process. So if you did need to go and show something to an ISO auditor, for instance, you could show for given documents what that audit log looked like of when events actually took place. So Rupert, should we just summarize the approval process?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, look, realistically, these names would all be different because we wouldn't be using a demo account. But, for this case, to stop me switching between numerous mailboxes and environments, we're trying to keep it a little bit simple. So to summarize on the approval process, firstly, who is the appropriate approver? Think of that list of people. And then the next piece is what are the steps in your approval process? There's typically a department owner, and then it may be off to a quality owner and maybe even an exec owner. Now, SharePoint out the box, you can do single level sign-offs without any further coding. But what we've done using the Power Platform is, as you've seen there, put that multi-stage in, but also put those multiple options in as well, and created the business rules on the back of it, which then sets the review date either to a year or 2 years out or to 30 days out. And then the final point, as Ben touched on there, we've got an audit trail all the way through. So we've got the evidence of what happened and when it happened. So we've approved a document, Ben. Clearly, the next stage is people need to see this. How do they find this document?
Yeah, so absolutely. We've highlighted the next stage is the publishing process. Now, as part of our approval steps, we've actually published this document automatically. And typically people feel quite more confident with documents being published as PDFs. So our process has automatically converted our document into a PDF and put it in the right place. So that's great. But how do we get people to actually find it and get to it? So as we've mentioned before, we've got a few ways of doing that. The first one is looking back at the homepage here. You might want to actually prepare a news story or an internal communication around it. As you can see here, we've got a news story about a whistleblowing policy that we've recently published. So we've created a SharePoint news story that gives more context. It gives links to perhaps where you might want to submit some feedback, or perhaps even links to a government website that defines why we've had to update this policy in the first place. You can also see that we can actually see who do we need to ask if we need a bit more information about the policy. And then finally, the link to that policy or link to those policies is embedded directly within this news story. The documents haven't been copied. We've got a single source of the truth here, but this news story is referencing those documents in the policies hub and will allow us to get to them really quickly. So that's how we might want to communicate that a policy has been updated. The second way is that you may want to have a definitive resource page for a particular policy or a particular set of information. So if you're in HR, you might have a page in your intranet all about annual, and you might want to go into the human resources area and again, link to those relevant policies that are stored in the policies hub. So again, unlike news, which is very transient, we have a sort of more static resource page, which provides a lot more information. And again, as we go a bit further down, we've got the links where people can actually go and upload the documents, or I go and access those documents and review them. So instead of just having a list of documents, by using SharePoint to create pages, it gives context and describes how it might be used or how I might want to provide further information around it. The next way is that people will often want to search for documents. So if we click into our policies hub, what we're going to see here is a search-driven experience that shows all of the PDF versions, the published versions of those documents, and then allows us to filter them. So I could search, or I could just use the filters down the left-hand side to go and narrow down my set of results. Let's click on HR first. That's going to narrow down our set of results to HR documents only. And then within that, we can now see that the available keywords has actually gone and narrowed as well. So we created that work-life balance policy earlier, the flexible working. Let's go and apply that. And we can now see that we've been taken straight into the flexible working policy here. We could click on a preview of it as well. So let's go and load up the preview there, Rupert. So it's just going to load up a preview window. So we can go and browse through and just scan through that policy to see if it's actually the one that I'm looking for. And then, of course, if it is, I'll just go and open that policy and read it in more detail, or download it if I need to do so. But again, because it's been stored as a PDF, as a compliance manager, I don't need to be quite as worried about people trying to make changes to it. Okay. Now, the final thing is, let's say that you are regularly being asked for certain types of policies. You can then pre-create these standard searches. So I search based on well-being. What you could do, if people are regularly asking about absence and leave, you can create a link on your navigation. So if you go and click on that, what this is doing is just preparing one of those searches where it's identified any documents that have been tagged with absence and leave, and then given me that sort of predefined set of results there based on the kind of feedback and information that people are commonly requesting. So again, that familiar experience of being able to search, but with predefined commonly searched for terms, for instance. Okay. So should we just summarize that, Rupert? Do you want to go through that?
Yeah. So we looked at 4 ways that people find information. And I think there's also a little bit of a split here. Of sometimes it's about making, people aware of changes because they're not seeking the information. And that's where news certainly comes in. But there's the other side where if someone is seeking the information, how can we service that to them? So we looked at the navigation there. We also looked at search. And then we also looked at that balance of news versus pages. So pages typically tend to provide context, as Ben said, and narrative of, why policies exist and where they fit into your organization. So I think the key thing to all of it is, it doesn't matter which way you're going to find the document, we are pointing to the same document. We're not creating additional PDF copies around your SharePoint environment. So we do have this single version. So if it is updated, we don't need to go and update the navigation or the news or the pages. We're still going to point to that newer version. So Ben, we published it. People have seen it. They're aware of it. The next step in our process.
So hopefully we're happy that they've actually seen the policy, but now we actually want to validate that they've understood the policy. So in HR terminology, this is sometimes referred to as attestation. We want people to attest that they've read and understood that policy, or commonly it's just referred to as policy acknowledgement. So we've already got a tab open there. Rupert, do you want to take us to our policy acknowledgement area? So if you've received a policy for acknowledgement, let's say the HR manager has gone and updated the annual leave process and they want to go and issue that to the organization and say, please, can you all review and acknowledge that you've read it? I will then receive a link that takes me to this page here where I can see all of the policies that have been assigned to me for review. I can see a preview of that policy embedded within this interface here. I can scan through it, I can read it. If I want to, I can open it up in a new window to look at it in a bit more detail using Word Online or even native Word, for instance, or download the PDF. And then once I'm happy with it, I can go through and tick the button that says, I acknowledge that I've read and understood the document. So once I do that, let's just go and confirm that, Rupert, shall we? Good stuff.
A quick refresh.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
No, I think my browser's having. There we go. I think we're back. We're back in the room. Right.
Okay,
there we go.
Back in the room, are we? All right. So we can see that that policy has now been acknowledged. And now we're moving on to the next policy. And I can work through my list of documents that I need to review. If you're that compliance manager, you will choose who those documents need to go to. So you could choose individuals, you could choose groups of people or distribution lists, or you could even just choose to issue it to the whole organization. And typically what we find with this, if I'm a compliance manager, I'm not really interested in the people that have acknowledged. I'm interested in the people that haven't acknowledged. They're the ones that I want to go and track and chase. So what I will see in my reporting view is a list of all of the acknowledgements that are assigned and who hasn't acknowledged. And of course, they'll get reminder emails if it goes past that particular due date. So let's just summarize that then, Rupert, I reckon.
Yeah, I think, I mean, just to build a couple of important points here. Firstly, we are tracking the version here as well. So if you have got multiple versions of policy, because things happen over time, you'll want to see, let's say there is a non-conformity, what version of a policy was in play at that time. So we've got that record there. And the second point is, as you might notice, this is a Power App. So this is something that we've developed to help meet a need that we don't think SharePoint does very well out the box. But if you are keen to use SharePoint in the box and maybe not look at little plugins like this, then you could use a basic approval process. But it's very difficult for that to scale if you've got multiple documents and large numbers of staff to try and actually track that. That's where you're going to find a challenge. So let's just summarize what we've just seen there in the acknowledge piece. So prior to acknowledgement, there is there's awareness, there's a training, and potentially a testing of that knowledge before. You don't want people just to say, yes, I agree to this if they don't understand it. But we talked about the acknowledgement, and we talked about we've now got this audit trail. And we've also got a process of what happens when this policy gets updated. We can push out for acknowledgement again. But ultimately, we're creating that trail, we're creating awareness, and hopefully that's going to help embed the policies within your organization. So Ben, policy's been acknowledged, it's being used, but maybe it's not quite how the business operates. So, what happens after acknowledgement?
Yeah. So as I say, it's all well and good if the policy has been sent out and people might have acknowledged it, but perhaps sometimes policies, they don't necessarily reflect what actually is the case in an organization. How do you create a feedback mechanism to allow people to support that? So let's just go and have a look at our feedback area then, Rupert. So we'll just jump back to the intranet here, and we can see that we've created a policy feedback page. What this allows us to do is view all of the initial feedback that we've already given and see what that status is. Has someone acknowledged it? Has there been any kind of response? But now we can actually submit feedback. So let's say I've got a concern or I've got a question about the device management policy, as we can see in that list. And I want to let's say I want to use an iPad, for instance, instead of a Microsoft Surface because people like iPads. So I can raise that question. Good stuff. So Rupert has put a question in there. Again, what is the type of feedback that I'm raising? Is it a clarification? Perhaps it's a regulation change. Maybe a subject matter expert is notifying someone else that actually there's a regulation change that hasn't been correctly incorporated in this new policy. Or finally, what if the experience on the ground is that people are not actually following that policy? I need to make people aware of it for compliance purposes to get it addressed, or to make an adjustment to that policy to reflect a little bit of what is in the real world. So we can choose what our available feedback types are. Again, this is something that is down to business rules. These are merely examples. We'll just go with clarity for the moment and just put a little bit more context in that description there. And then when we're good to go, we're just going to submit it. So that bit of feedback has been submitted. It will come through into our list. And what's going to happen behind the scenes is that the compliance manager will be notified that a piece of feedback has been received. They can review it. They can write a response, which will come back to me as the submitter, so I can see if it's been acknowledged or updated or incorporated. And then, of course, the final step potentially is that leads to a review or a change in the policy. So let's just move on to the next step or summarize what we've covered in this section.
Yeah, so the feedback loop, I mean, typically either triggered by internal or external change. So internal is how your business operates, your organization operates, or externally, typically regulatory changes, requirements, law changes. And then feedback from your user community, either around clarifications where a policy doesn't explain a certain scenario, or as a way of capturing non-conformities. As Ben said earlier, these are customizable. These are for that we've collected from various client engagements, but we can add others and refine as needed. So you're making sure you get the right level of feedback. So Ben, we've got some feedback. What happens next?
What happens next? Where do we go from here? Yeah, it's a good question. So really, these documents will go through, as we saw in the diagram at the start, the final step of the process is to review it. So that could be a review that's triggered by an event such as a regulation change, for instance, or if the policy is fine and it simply has a requirement to be reviewed every 2 years, for example, which is quite common in ISO, you might have a 2-year requirement that says, When we approach 2 years' time, we need to go through a review and validate that this policy is still accurate and still reflects the situation that we have. But what we don't want to have to do is track that via a spreadsheet and calendar events and things like that. We want that notification to be automated. What we showed you at the start of this is how we go and assign document owners. So by adding that document owner, they are the people that will be notified perhaps 3 months prior to a document reaching its expiry date. And they will receive that notification to go and actually validate it and review it. So Rupert, let's just have a look at a couple of ways that we can receive those notifications. Let's just click on our email a minute. We've got an example of a notification email saved here. We'll just take a quick look at that. So if we click inside this email, we can see that as an owner, I've got 3 different policies that I need to go and review and keep up to date. So instead of receiving an email for every single policy, because if you're responsible for 30 policies, that could be quite frustrating, we've got a single email that's got all of the policies that are going to be due within the next 30 days. Let's have a look at that in Microsoft Teams as well. Should we go and see what that looks like over there? So again, what we've done is recognizing the different ways that people may want to be notified. If you're heavy Teams users, you may find that you spend more of your time in Teams than email. So being able to bring that notification through on multiple channels is really powerful. So in this case, we're using something called an adaptive card to present the same type of information. We've made this quite visual. We've given it a heading. We can see the documents there, and we've got links directly in Microsoft Teams that allow me to actually click through and see those documents. So let's just go and do that. So clicking on that review button has taken me to a filtered view of our policies library, where any documents that are assigned to me personally are due within 30 days. So we've narrowed that set of documents to only show me the stuff that's relevant. We can see the next review date based on those visual indicators. We can see that they're coming up within the next 30 days, in particular the flexible working policy that we temporarily approved. And from here, we can then go through and start reviewing and doing the modifications that we need to do. So let's say we need to make a change. We validated any metadata that we need to do. What realistically we would do then, let's just scroll back to the start a minute, Rupert. We won't go all the way through this, but what we would then choose to do is actually open that Word document and load it and start doing the next stage of the process, reviewing it. And when we're happy, resubmitting it for first approval, which takes us back around the loop and we start the cycle again. So should we just summarize that then?
Yeah, I think so. So what we've seen there, you touched on review. So having the correct ownership, obviously be really considerate of movers and leavers. What does that impact in terms of, is the right person assigned to the right policy? And then the second thing is consider what triggers a review as well. Is it based on time? As Ben talked about, about 24 months, maybe rolling policy. But the other piece might be feedback. Do certain kinds of feedback trigger review and start that process off sooner? So, and I think the final takeaway from that is when that trigger happens, make sure that people are aware that they've got work to do based on where they work. So if they work out of email, send them an email. If they work out of Teams, send them to Teams. In our case, we send it to both to cover all the bases. So Ben, that summarizes nicely, the process. Great from a sort of ground level perspective, but from an exec level, how do I get my sense of feeling of where we are? And particularly, I've got large numbers of maybe policies under management. I've got teams under me, and I'm a regulatory, business which is regulated. Then I've got some responsibilities myself, aren't I?
Yeah, so absolutely. In terms of what we've shown so far, if you're perhaps a director of quality, or perhaps even if you're the chief exec or COO, you don't necessarily want to be going through and browsing through lists of document libraries to figure out what's going on. What we would want in that case, perhaps, is to have a Power BI dashboard that's created that gives me this summary, that bird's eye view of all of the things that I'm working on. So this is based on a real life example where we've sort of anonymized some of the information here, but what we're showing is a real example of how we can get that bird's eye view of what our document management system looks like. How many documents have been published? Have we got any documents that are going through the approval process? Are there any documents that have been initiated for acknowledgement, and what does that look like? How many are pending? How many approved? And then on the bottom left-hand side, we can see how many documents are at a given stage of that approval process. Because this is Power BI, it supports drill through. So it means that I could click on any one of these interactive charts and filter, and then go through and narrow down to see the specific individual data let's say there was some documents that were overdue and I would particularly wanted to go and address those, I'll be able to go in, narrow down and find who those appropriate owners are and go and chase them because they haven't gone and updated those documents yet. So effectively, because the information is in SharePoint, Power BI will natively be able to access it and track that kind of metadata and allow you to develop reports on it, or we can do it for you.
Excellent, Ben. Well, look, I mean, that summarizes the policy lifecycle and the reporting at the top level down from that. So at which point, I'm not going to talk through this again because you've seen it. Very happy to take any questions, which I'll probably put to Ben. Actually, I do know one has come in. I've just got to work out, go to webinar. Here we go. So Ben, what happens if a document owner has left the organization is the question.
Yeah, so I mean, that is a really good point about document owners. And I think SharePoint isn't going to give you an automated mechanism to deal with that because SharePoint doesn't know if a document owner is actually still available. So it's quite important to make sure that you're liaising with your IT department so that you are, they have a formal joiners, movers and leavers process in place. It is possible to create some customizations that do notifications and then revalidate, but it's not something that SharePoint's going to do for you. So that is a part of the process that does need a bit of coordination with IT, making sure that you have a proper formal leaving process assigned. So when someone does leave, you're notified so you can go through and validate where are those owners, do they need to be reassigned to someone? You're not going to get an automatic notification, unfortunately.
Okay, so I think the takeaway is not out the box, but if it was a real specific requirement for you, then it could be written as a custom solution.
Custom process, yeah, exactly.
And then the second question I've got here is around e-signatures. Some people say, or one person saying that they have a requirement around e-signatures rather than just an approval in Share. I know Microsoft talk a lot about Adobe Sign and other tools. Is that something which can be integrated into the process here?
Yeah, so it's a good point. So e-signatures isn't something that Microsoft provide in SharePoint out of the box, but what they try and do is point you in the direction of some of the industry standard e-signature tools out there, such as DocuSign or Adobe Sign. What we're able to do though is part of a publishing process. If you do have a requirement for e-signature, then you're able to integrate into those platforms and say, once it's reached a certain stage, let's say it's gone to the publishing stage, I can then go and take that document and kick it off over into an e-signature tool where it will go and get distributed for electronic signature. Once that process is complete, I can then suck the document back out and go and put it in the right place, such as my published library. My first question would probably be though, what is the requirement for e-signature? Why are you doing e-signature? Because a lot of cases, the auditing and the management systems within SharePoint itself will cover it. However, if you are in perhaps a country that has certain regulations around signatures on certain types of documents, maybe it's clinical documents, for instance, then you may have that requirement to include the e-signature functionality. We use a product called Connective because it provides some very easy integration actually, and it's very, very cost effective for document management compared to perhaps DocuSign or Adobe Sign. So we've integrated a tool called Connective to support that, which we found works very well for our customers.
Okay, cool. I've got a couple more questions here. So Ben, does it have to be Word documents or could it be for other digital assets such as artwork?
That's a really good point actually. And so in terms of what we've shown you, the documents that we started, we created them from a template, and that is in Word. However, pretty much everything from that first point onwards is based on documents in SharePoint with metadata assigned. So all of the approval processes, all of the workflows, all of the reviews, doesn't matter what type of document it is. So let's say, for instance, you've got a whole load of Adobe InDesign files, but then you have published PDF brochures, for example, that you do want to distribute. You could upload those published PDF brochures and still assign metadata to them and track them, take them through the approval process. The only thing that you'll lose is some of the native integration to make comments and feedback. So if you're submitting a non-Office document and someone wants to comment on it, you need to make sure that they have a mechanism to support those changes or suggestions. That's something that Office will do easily, but everything else in terms of approval, notification, metadata review, all of that could be done on PDFs, design files, artwork, images, etc. Yeah.
So just to be clear, the annotation of a document you'd need to consider a different way, but you could still write comments in the workflow process in the comments box.
That's right, exactly.
Okay. And then one more question. How much in-house resource, i.e. IT or administration, is required once this is set up and running from their perspective to keep the lights on?
I mean, that is a very good question. I think realistically in this scenario, the main resource required is that quality manager style resource, the person that is the owner of this document management system. And it's not necessarily the right person to necessarily be an IT owner. It's someone that's probably more aligned to a business role, to be able to make sure that the document approvers is correct and updated, that they're reviewing the audit logs and the acknowledgements and working with the system. So it tends to be more of a sort of operation role or quality management role within that. Now, again, with any system, there is a level of IT support that's required because nothing is infallible. If something does go wrong, you do want to make sure that you do have someone that understands technically how the solution is put together. So that might be an internal SharePoint admin role that you have, for instance, or it could be an outsourced partner that you use to support that. But typically, you're only going to be addressing problems when they might go wrong. So it's more of an ad hoc as opposed to regular maintenance. The main maintenance is the operations manager role.
Cool. I've just sneakily popped a little poll there. So if you'd like a deeper dive into SharePoint policy and document management, we can certainly help with that. If it's just informational, factual, and useful takeaway, then that's great too. That was the purpose of this, is to educate and not to pitch. And I think just going back to your previous point, Ben, talking about the operational of this piece, I suspect that quality manager is doing this work anyway, but it's just doing it a different way. So they were doing it through an Excel spreadsheet. Now I've got a system, it makes my life a little bit easier. And I get the other challenge we see is where the business rules change on how a policy needs to be signed up or approved. And that's probably where you need some help. So
yeah, I mean, I think it becomes that operations manager role. It becomes more about management by escalation or exception, as opposed to actually having to maintain and do the work. The work is done for you, and then you receive those notifications, and then in the meantime, you could be focusing on the other work that you need to do, such as strategy work, etc. Whereas historically, it's very manual and takes up quite a lot of time, and it's very time consuming to manage a system like this.
Excellent. Okay, well, we've answered all the questions, and actually thank you for the positive feedback. Otherwise, have a great day and thank you for your time. So that wraps up our webinar on managing policies within SharePoint. Hope you found it really useful. If you want to have a conversation about this, please do reach out to us at Information EXP. Delighted to go into the next level of detail with you and explore a little bit further. Otherwise, have a great day and watch out for our next webinar. We're running these every month.